All right. You're all here on time, so you deserve extra credits. Way to go. We're going to be doing the afternoon service. We're going to use our blue Sidor, even though it's not Shabbat, but it's going to be okay. We turn to page 1. Page 1 in the blue book. We're going to do the afternoon service. Ashrei shevetecha, hoja lucha sela, Shem shkach lo, Shem shnai lo hav, Shem David. Tzilat Anra de Rapiv Rekol Basar Shem Kochalei Lam Ba'ev V'nach Dverach Yam Yatavid Olam Hallelujah. Please rise. Yigadav Yigadash Shemei Rabbah V'amad Divrach Yirtev V'lik Mokotei B'chayachon V'mechon B'chay D'chol Beit Yisrael B'agalaz Makari V'imru Amen. Yehi Shemei Rabbah V'rach Le'lam Amel Maya Yit B'rach V'shtabach V'tbar V'tmam Nasei V'tidar V'tidar Shemei D'Kodesha Baruchu Le'lam Mekol Rachadav V'sharata Tushbchata V'nechamata Damram B'yamav Yimru Amen. We're going to join together for the beginning of the Amidah, 3a in the blue book, 3a. Adonai sefata tiftachu fi yagi tehilatecha Baruch ata Adonai Eloheinu Eloi Avotenu Eloi Avraham Eloi Yitzhak Eloi Yaakov Ha'el Hagadol Hagibor Vanora El Elyon Gomer Chasadim Tovim V'konei Hakol V'zocher Chasdei Avot Mevi Goel Livnei V'nehem L'man Shemo B'Yahava Melech Ozer Moshiach Magen Baruch Ata Adonai Magen Avraham Ata Gibor L'Olam Adonai Mechayem Etim Ata Rav Lo Shia Morid Hatal Mechalkel Chaim Bechesed Mechayem Etim B'Rachamim Rabim Somech Nofim Rofech Cholim Umatir Asurim Umekayem Notor Shanei Afar Michamoch Bag V'rot Umidom Elach Melech Memitum Chayel Matzmiach Yeshua V'ne'eman Ata L'chayot Meitim Baruch Ata Adonai Mechayel Meitim. Page 4. Negadesh Shemcha B'olam Keshem Shemak Shem Oto V'Shmei Marom K'katuv Yad Nevi'echa V'Karazeh El Zeh V'Yamar Kadosh 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 Adonai Tzva'o Malok Al Haaretz Kevodo L'matam Baruch Yomeru Baruch Adonai Mimkomo Dvir Kodesh Katuv Le'mor Yimloch Adonai L'Olam L'Haik Tzon L'Dor V'Ador Hallelujah L'Dor V'Ador Nigid Godlecha L'Netzach Netzachim Kedushatcha Nakdish V'Shivchacha Eloheinu Mipilim U'Shlolam Ba'ed Ki Al Melech Kadosh Ata Baruch Ata Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh. We continue privately with the rest of the Amidah through page 9. Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru, imru, amen. Yase shalom, Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Yaseh Shalom. Yaseh Shalom. Shalom Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'meru Amen. If you haven't finished your private prayers, you should take your time. If you have, there is a special prayer for Yom Hashoah that is added in that I'm going to recite now in Hebrew and then in English. Nachem Adonai Eloheinu et hasherit amcha Yisrael ud mutzal me'esh ki kam aleinu oyev achzar bikesh lahashmid laharog le'abed et kol haYehudim mina'ar va'ad zaken taf v'nashim va'amar lechu v'nachi chedem migoye v'lo yizacher shem Yisrael od azi hamayim shetafunu hirvunu la'ana oy na lanu ki shudadnu ki rachak mimenu menachem al ele ani bochia ach lo lenatzech tish kachenu. Adonai our God, comfort the remnant of your people Israel, a brand plucked from the fire. For a cruel enemy arose to destroy us, to murder every Jew, young and old, women and children, saying, "Come, let us annihilate them," so the name of Israel might no longer be uttered. The waters engulfed us. Our tormentors fed us bitter poison. Alas, we are undone, for our source of comfort is yet far off. Recalling these things I weep, but you will not forget us eternally. Kaddish Shalem is on page 10, page 10. Yigadav Yigadash Shemei Rabbah Be'alma Divra Kirtev V'nechma Kotev B'chayachon U'v'mechom B'chay T'chol Beit Yisrael B'agal Azman Grei V'yimeru Amen. Yesh Shmei Rabbah Mevorach Le'olam Yomei U'mayayim Yitbarach V'ishtabach V'itpar V'itpam Nasei V'tadar V'daytelav Shemei D'Kudesha Baruch Hu Le'ila Mekol B'chata V'shirata Tishbachata V'nechamata Dar Yom B'yalma V'yimeru Man Tkabel Todon V'vodon D'chosho Kodam V'von D'v'shmai V'yimeru Man Yesh Lam Rabim Shumai V'chaim Alen V'koso V'yimeru Man Oseh Shalom Mermav Hu Yaseh Shalom Alen V'koso V'yimeru Amen. Aleinu L'shabeach L'Adon HaKol L'tei Gdula L'yotzer Breshit Shelo Asanu Kagoei Aratzot Belo Samanu Kimishpachot Adama Shelo Sam Chelkeinu Kahem Begoraleinu Kecho Amonam Vanachnu Korim Umishtachavim Umodim Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Kagatu b'toratecha Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed v'ne'emar v'haya Adonai le'melech al kol ha'aretz bayom ha'u yeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad. You may be seated. When one has a yard site, they read the name aloud of those whom they're remembering. And tonight, in many ways, is the yard site for 6 million. So I'm going to ask those who have been assigned to read the names of family members of our community who fell, who were murdered, killed in the Shoah.
The Russ and Solomon families from Munchak, Czechoslovakia, and the Hershkovitz and Preisler families from Mazalvia, Romania. family of Elke Rosen. Sarah, Gittel, Gussie, is Yisrael, and Geshi Hertz, Mordechai and Nellie David, and Aaron and Brucha Katz, all from Siget, Romania, family of Galrado. Zelda and David Klein from Munkac, Czechoslovakia, family of Sharon Anish. Monik Kugelhem from Sasowik, Poland, family of Wendy Brill. The Alisker, Stein, Milgrom, Charton, and Geyer families from Pod Kamin and Dubnar, Poland, family of Boris Charton. Miriam Freda and Yaakov Hockman from Kosovo, Poland, family of Marlene Cohen. Rabbi Charles and Esther Geller and Riva and Sam Narunsky from Poland, family of Monica Cohen. The Elderhei family from Stary Samber, Poland, family of David and Rabbi Amos Elderhei.
We remember for a blessing Yankel, Fagel, Dora, Binka, Manya, Rifkel, Eisenstein, and the Kessler family from Krakow, Poland, family of Jack Eisenstein. The Kami family from Bitola, Yugoslavia, family of Elpern family. Bernard and Paul Hamowich from Paris, France, family of Alicia Epstein. Shmuel David Grunbaum from Debrecen, Hungary, family of the Frizel family. The Erga family from Bogdan, Czechoslovakia, the Mamlor family from Berlin, Germany, and the Sichel family from Frankfurt, Germany, family of Randy Gershwind. Joseph Hella and Rosalie Rosenzweig from Riga, Latvia, family of Rob Hella. Laser and Rachel Ingber and Hersh and Hudja Pollock from Riskova, Romania, my family.
Leah Shimshon, Elias Schwimmer and family from Nitschini, Remet, Slovakia. And Peril Yaakov Schwartz and family from Irshava, Slovakia, family of Eric of Widover. Kusiel, Aaron, Rivka, Todres, Gittel, and Guttele Kaplan, and Beller and Lazar Golden. From Zelwa, Poland, family of J. Kaplan. Moses, Ephraim, Shlomo, and Miriam Herskovitz from Chemnik, Czechoslovakia. Chiel Zilberblech, Basha Berenstein, my namesake, family from Hrubieszov, Poland. Yitzhak Schwartz, family Rosenblum, brother and his wife, Lutzi, 4 girls, and Gizzy and her sister. Family, they're from Hungary, family of Barbara and Andrew Rosenblum.
The Listwa family from Kalisz, Poland, family of Helene Kamen. The Jonas and Fried's family from Zakupania, Poland, family of the Jonas family. Rose, Louis, Alex, Gabriella, and Sandor Klein. Sarah, Vera, and Lily Weiss from Hungary, family of Emery Klein. Leo Nelkin, Joseph Borchek from Breslau, Germany, and Bino Populars from Jarthsewin, Germany, family of Cheryl Lerner. Sarah, Wolf, Russell, and Minka, and Kalmar, Shmuel, from Kalmar family, Shmuel, Marcel, and Rosa from Opdorf, Poland. The Kurtz family, Tomashva and Modinsky, family of Bill Rezelbach.
Shalom and Siegfried Rosenzweig from Germany, family of Eric Rosen. My family, which is the Wiegand, Bandus, and Wignansky families from Henchini and Ludge, Poland, family of Helen Rubin. Kunagunda and Siegfried Samuel from Leipzig, Germany, family of Stephen Samuels. Maska, Isaac, and Zvi Hirschlevich from Zaznawich, Poland, and Moshe, Yosef, Tauba, and Henry Hirschvelevich from Krakow, Poland, family of Mark Hursley.
If there's anybody here whose name we want to represent their family, please come up at this time.
My grandparents, Sarah and Yakov Rosenberg from Poltavsk, Poland, and many of my cousins, aunts, uncles, and other relatives that all perished in Auschwitz.
You know, stay close. I'm going to call you up in a second. Anyways, you can sit down if you want, and then I'll call you back. It's really up to you. You know, it's hard to read those lists, not just because it's hard to imagine each of their names, but it's hard to get our mouths around the words, the places that they were from. I want to try a little exercise before we light our candles to help think about what today is about. So if you're not going to fall asleep, close your eyes for a moment. Close your eyes for a moment and think about when you woke up this morning. Think about whatever struggles you went through, maybe the breakfast you ate, who you saw. Think about the appointments and activities you had till you made it to lunchtime. Perhaps there was someone to eat with, or perhaps not. Think about the way in which you went through your day, the responsibilities you had, the people you called. Think about organizing your life so that you could be here tonight, when you had to schedule dinner, who you had to talk to, what choices you had to make of how to get here, and open your eyes. Each of you, for the whole day, did a day of living. One of the awful things the Nazis took from us is that each of these names that we read, even each of these candles that represent 1 million souls, had those days that you just had taken from them. Even the ones who survived, before the Nazis took over, they were living their lives. They had a breakfast to get to. They had appointments in the morning, a lunch, and a meeting, and had to figure out how to juggle their things. Each single name, each single soul, and on this day, it is impossible to hold on to all of them. So as we recite those names, as we just did, and in a moment when we light these candles, as much as we can open ourselves up, not just to what was lost, but to understand that what it means to be a Jew is to bear the incredible burden of generation after generation of pharaohs, of Babylonians, of inquisitors, of Cossacks, of Nazis, of Hamas members who have said, I'm going to take those days away from you. You Jews don't get regular days. What it means to be a Jew is to take on the burden of all of those people and then take as many of those days as we can. So in a moment, we'll light not just 6 candles for the 6 million we've lost, not just 7 for the millions of those who were killed by the Nazis for a myriad of other being different, and one more, an 8th candle, because on October 7th, 1,200, not just of our people, but people who just had the nerve of being in the land of Israel, were murdered for existing. One more candle, because since then, there's been nearly 300 soldiers who have lost their lives just trying to stop the next October 7th. And one more candle, because 133 souls are still in captivity in this moment. So I know that we have at least one survivor, but are there any other survivors here with us that would come up and help us light? Pearl, if you're up for it, I know we're far away. It's a schlep, but if you could. Oh, that's a great idea. Barbara, will you bring one? Take one with you. Now I'll ask anyone whose parent was a survivor to come up and join us at the candles. Anyone who is the grandchild of a survivor, please also come up and join us at the candles. Let's let Pearl light the first one if we can. Now, there's no particular order. As we can get as close as we can and light the candles together, that would be meaningful. Please rise. Listen, I heard about people in the camps who made menorahs. We're going to get these candles lit. And one more. Should I light the last one? Maybe just take a match and light the match in the candles. So you don't have to use that. Okay. If you were studiously paying attention, you'll notice that we stopped Mincha before we made it to Mourner's Kaddish. There is a custom that you are allowed to say Kaddish for someone else, especially someone who doesn't have someone to say Kaddish for them. So many of these 6 million will never know what their yahrzeit date is. We may not even ever know their name. So in this moment, I'll ask us all to remain standing and join together in the words of the Mourner's Kaddish, which are found on page 12 in our blue book. Yit gadal ve'yit gadash shemei rabbah. Be'alma divra kirutei v'yamlich malchutei b'chayechon v'yamechon uv'chayei dechol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'izman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shmei rabba mevarach leolam l'olmei omaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekurusha barichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'nechemata, ta'amiram bi'alma v'imru, amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. Oseh shalom b'mrumav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru, amen. You may be seated. We hope and pray that each of their memories will be forever a blessing. I want to first start by welcoming you, I guess, tonight to the Elke Rosen Yom Hashoah program. From the dawn of the synagogue, Elke had been a part of making sure that Yom HaShoah, that Holocaust education programming was present and a key aspect of what we did here at Woodbury Jewish Center. And the committee this year includes Gail Rado, Alana Goffman, Marlene Cohen, and Cantor Cohen, and pinch hitting at the last minute, Howie helped out too, mostly because Gail told him to. You know, I say one more word before I have Herb/Chaim up to share his story. I always debate, is it okay to laugh at a Yom HaShoah program? And I remember something that I actually have heard from multiple survivors, that at night, when they were sleeping 3 or 4 to a bunk, in the same bunk, occasionally someone would have a nightmare and would thrash or call out. And the rule in the bunk in the camps was you don't wake them up because even a nightmare is better than the reality they have. And what I take from that is any chance Jews can gather together peacefully, safely, and happily and share a laugh is a reminder that that's what we're about. And with that, I will let him tell his story, but we'll call up Herb or a Chaim friend. If you've been a regular, Pearl, his mother, has been sitting right in that spot. Sometimes I'm not sure she goes home. I think she just stays right there for the next week, each and every week, and we're going to hear their story.
As I get younger, it becomes more difficult to control my emotions. And some of this stuff is not easy. So please excuse me in advance. Standing here this evening is truly a surreal experience. Growing up with my baby sister, Basha, today referred to as Barbara Rosenblum, we knew nothing of our family's Holocaust experience. They wanted us to have normal lives. They kept the horrors deep within themselves for almost 50 years. I took my mom to a UJA Witness Project presentation at the Tilly Center. She decided she had to tell her story. She changed the lives of the students that participated and has been a keynote presenter and speaker. Now, L'dor v'dor. From generation to generation, it's my turn. A solemn obligation to ensure that we never forget, especially important during these insane times we live in, to help ensure that never again means never again. Our family story is one of horrors, torture, death, hunger, survival, heroism, and miracles. It all started in 1939 in my mom's hometown of Rubieszów, Poland. They went to sleep with the Russians. They woke up in the morning to motorcycles and tanks and trucks. The Nazis took over the town. The first thing they did, they just started shooting people in the public square. They shot a rabbi, they shot civilians, they killed a horse. They dug a big pit and just filled the pit with all the victims. The Nazis realized that the biggest threat to their rule were the men of the town. So an edict was issued. It came from Nazi headquarters that all the men of the neighboring town of Chelm and the men of Rubieszów would be taken on a death march and killed. An edict came out every man between the ages of 16 and 60 had to report to the public square. They were taken on a march. They were told they were being taken to work. If you said you were hungry, if you said you were thirsty, if you wanted to sit down, if you needed to lay down, they would shoot you. After a week into the march, so many innocent men being killed, my grandfather and my grandmother's two brothers got together and they realized that they had limited time left before they were killed by the Nazis. That night, they jumped into the Buk River on the Russian-Poland border, a half-frozen river. They swam to the other side, to the Russian side. They made it. They were actually welcomed by some local Russians, given dry clothes, and then the Russian government sent them to a labor camp in Siberia. All the Jews of the town, the remaining, who were primarily women, were clustered together in a ghetto, buildings and apartments in the town. Most of the women had already been sent to concentration camps or labor camps. The children disappeared. And my mom and her mother, my grandma, had to go to find food in the abandoned apartments so that those remaining could feed themselves. My mother's grandmother, on a Friday evening, made a terrible mistake. She lit Shabbos candles. An SS officer walking by noticed the light in the apartment, sent up soldiers and dogs. They took her grandma and 6 children that had been hiding in the attic downstairs. And the SS officer told her, "I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to kill your grandson first, then I'm going to kill you." My mother's 6-year-old brother was killed. His picture is on the front of that table. They were then sent to labor camps. The Nazis needed labor. They needed slave labor to do the various tasks that they needed performed for the war effort. They were sent to Budzin, to Vilichka, to Mielec, to Plashav, where they did everything from clean aircraft, shovel snow, and they worked in a coal mine, in the pits, in pajamas. No masks, no protection, absolutely nothing. Then they were loaded aboard a train and taken to a work camp. When they got out of the train, they saw a sign, Arbeit macht frei. Work shall set you free. It was Auschwitz. On entering Auschwitz, everyone got to walk before Dr. Mengele, who decided who would live and who would die. If he sent you to the left, you went to the gas chambers. If he sent you to the right, you were perceived as healthy enough to work as a laborer. Mengele sent my grandmother to the left, to the gas chamber, and my mother to the right, to work. Having seen her brother and her family killed, her father and her uncles taken away, all the women, all her family disappearing, she knew that she could not survive without her mother. A transport of women arrived at Auschwitz from Holland. Mengele loved to count, so he could count how many victims he would be responsible for in a given day. So he started walking towards the transport, and as he walked forward, my mother jumped and ran behind Mengele, grabbed her mother, and pulled my grandmother to her side and hid her behind women. They spent almost a year in Auschwitz, mostly shoveling snow in pajamas with wooden shoes. 2 pieces of bread a day as rations. My grandmother would lick the jam off the bread and save the bread for my mother because she was a growing teenager at the time. They somehow survived after seeing unspeakable horrors all around them. They were sent to Willingstadt, another labor camp, where they were treated as slaves. My mother made a terrible mistake. She went to the bathroom one day in the afternoon, and one of the SS officers accused her of not wanting to work. So he took off his belt and whipped her. They spent a number of months in Willingstadt. It was already the end of the war, having spent 5 years of her teenage life not knowing if she would survive to see the next day. It was towards the end of the war, and the Nazis wanted to eliminate all evidence of their horrors and atrocities. So they sent my mother and 128 other Jewish women to Theresienstadt to be killed the following morning. At the beginning of the war, in another town closer to the Russian border, Horodla, a teenage boy took his family and loaded up 2 horse-drawn wagons and drove them to the Russian side, to the Russian border. He was immediately enlisted in the Russian army and given an intelligence test, which he did extremely well on. The Russians gave him an option. You can either become a regular soldier and go to the front, or you can go to officer training school and become a tank commander. He asked an intelligent question: how long does officer training last? Says, a year and a half. So sign me up. He was sent to officer training school in Siberia, in Ekaterinburg. He excelled. And while at the officer training school, he had heard that there were Polish Jews in a local labor camp. He went to see them. He met with them. He gave the camp commandant some gasoline, soap, some money, things that were difficult to get during the war. And he told the commandant, "You take care of these men. I'll be back." He was an outstanding officer, was assigned a tank battalion of 125 tanks, proved himself an outstanding officer, and became General Zhukov's right-hand man. The general was one of the most famous generals in the Russian army. And he had promised his father, he was raised in an Orthodox family, he had promised his father that he would put on his tefillin every morning. So one morning, standing next to his tank, putting his tefillin on, the general came over to him and said, "Felix, what's that on your head? And what's that on your arm?" "General, on my head, it helps me to see where the Germans are hiding. And on my arm, it helps me to shoot straight." The general looked at him and said, "Felix, get me 10,000 pair." The first city that the Russian army retook from the Germans was Lublin in Poland. That day, my father was going around asking, where did the Germans send the Jews? They told him they were in a camp southeast of the city. That night, he drove his tanks through the gates of Majdanek concentration camp. The German officers and guards had already fled. They only left behind 500 starving, dying corpses of Jews. What my father saw there gave him sleepless nights for the rest of his life. Showers with Zyklone B poisonous gas, cremation ovens, piles of clothing, piles of shoes, burned skeletons, burned skulls, piles of bodies, including those of children that never made it into the ovens. He tried to give the remaining prisoners some food and water and encouragement that they were now safe. Unfortunately, it was no use, as they had less than a day to live. A man came over to him, a skeleton, dirty. He said, "Can I give you something?" Of course, anything. He thought maybe he would get a list of names of family members that he wanted to find. Maybe he had hidden some gold, some diamonds, something of value. What the man gave him was this Yom Kippur Machzor, Yom Kippur prayer book, with the words, "If there are any Jews left alive in this world, maybe they can use this Machzor to pray on Yom Kippur." My father took it. He told them, "I will protect it. I will guard it. I will take it wherever I go. And Jews will pray from it on Yom Kippur." 2 years before my father passed, he gave it to me for safekeeping. And we read from it every Yom Kippur in our temple. He liberated 10 concentration camps. And in May, the following year, his battalion was in Czechoslovakia. The Russians had developed the ability to intercept German radio messages, and he intercepted a message that 129 women, Jewish women, were being transferred to Theresienstadt concentration camp to be killed the following morning. He told the general he was going to take the camp that night. He entered into Theresienstadt. There was few German guards there. They captured them. And he found the women in the basement of one of the buildings behind steel doors, in total darkness, no water, no food. He blew open the door, and he told them in Yiddish that they were safe, they were free. This is the Russian army. You don't have to worry. And he asked, "Are there any women here from Poland who speak Yiddish?" An older woman and her teenage daughter stepped forward. And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "From Rubieszów in Poland." He said, "Oh, that's not far from my hometown." "And what happened to your family?" "Well, my husband and my brothers were taken on a death march by the Nazis and killed." "And what is your name?" "Zilberblech." He looked at her and was able to tell her that her husband and her brothers were alive in a labor camp in Siberia. He called his brother and his father in Russia, sent them to get the men out. They smuggled themselves across the former Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, and were reunited in a small town in Poland where my dad had arranged for an apartment for them. Upon arrival, the young Russian officer greeted Mr. Zilberblech and said, can I ask you something? He says, of course, you can ask me anything. You saved my family. Can I marry your daughter? So, she was young at the time. They got married 3 years later and came to America in 1948. And 2 years later, I was born. And then my sister, 2.5 years after that. And some incredible stories. My dad, at one point, was made responsible for guarding the churches in a part of Germany. Parishioners were entering the church, and about a half hour after services began, a teenage girl came over to him and said, "Are you Jewish?" He said, "Yes." She told him that the man who she came with is a farmer. Her father had sold his business and gave all the money to the farmer to protect her. She was being horribly violated, and she was going to kill herself. He said, "Tell me, where is the farm, and what day does the farmer go to market?" He had liberated a camp not far, and he had met a young couple who lost their child, who were going to emigrate to Israel. He went to their apartment and told them about the teenage girl. And I said, bring her to us. We will treat her as our daughter. He took 2 soldiers, 2 jeeps, went to the farm, got the girl, brought her to the couple, and that was, didn't see her anymore until afterwards. On my father's side, the entire family emigrated to Israel. About 40 years after the war, he was visiting his family, and his brother-in-law told him, "I found the girl. She's living in an apartment in Renana." They went to the apartment, knocked on the door. She came to the door and said, "Do you recognize me?" No. He always carried a picture of himself in his lieutenant uniform. He took out the picture, showed her the picture. She collapsed in his arms. She was already a grandmother of 2. In the early 1970s, a friend of my grandparents, one of his friends had just returned from the Ukraine and told him that they had seen his sister, who was also lost during the war. So he told my grandparents that he was going to the Ukraine to find his sister. 2 weeks later, he called my grandparents and told them, "Unfortunately, the woman only looks like my sister. She's not my sister. But I found your twin brother." They arranged for him to come to visit on a visa. And for 3 months, every single day, the KGB picked him up at work and questioned him. "What are you going to tell him in America? Don't you know that behind every tree we have one of our people who will hear every word that you say? Be careful what you tell them." This is every single day for 3 months. When he arrived, he was petrified. He wouldn't speak to anybody but my grandparents. It took him almost 2 months. Then he finally agreed to go to temple with my grandfather. He went shopping. He looked around. He couldn't believe it. People were smiling. They were happy. The supermarkets were full of food. he decided he had to bring his family to America. He brought his son, but his daughter and her family didn't want to come. His son-in-law was an engineer, had a good job, but he didn't realize that his father-in-law, running a leather factory, was actually selling leather on the black market and helping to feed his family. So after a few months, there wasn't enough money for food, decided to come to America. And our cousins are here from the Ukraine, and she called me a few days ago in tears, saying, "You have to say what your parents and grandparents did for our family, because if we were in the Ukraine today, we have no idea whether or not we would be alive." And our Ukrainian family today numbers about 30, all working, all leading good lives, and thankful to be in America. We, numbers. Oh, one other little story about my dad. He went back to his town after the war, went to his house, knocked on the door. There was a Polish family living in the house. They looked at him and said, "Jews don't live here anymore," and slammed the door in his face. The following morning, he drove his tank into the town, put the turret of the tank 6 inches from the door, knocked on the door and said, "You have 10 minutes to get the hell out of my house." There was a Polish farmer across the street who knew his family, who knew his father, and offered to buy the house. So I said, "Sure." He gave him a valise full of zlotys, which were probably worth $100 at the time. And he didn't just leave the town. He found that there were 10 Jewish men in prison at the central government station and prison. Why were they in prison? Out of fear for their lives. The Poles were killing Jews who were returning to their hometown. So he loaded up the men in jeeps and took them to a DP camp where they would be safe. We have become immune to numbers as we now speak in terms of trillions. What is 6 million? What does the number 6 million mean? What does the number 1.5 million children mean? 1.5 million children represents the entire public school system of Nassau County, Suffolk County, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. It's absolutely incomprehensible, the suffering, the horrors, seeing your family members murdered. You think you have problems in your life? Try to imagine 5 years, every single day, torture, horrors, not knowing if you will see tomorrow, having to go to a foreign country, penniless, having to start new lives, raising a family. It takes incredible inner strength. Holocaust education is a necessity. The radical idiots are already yelling that the most thoroughly documented horrific event in human history never happened. My sister entered my mother and my grandmother's name in the Washington Holocaust Museum database. They sent 31 pages documenting the transfer of my mother and grandmother between labor camps, Auschwitz, Theresienstadt. Every step of the way, they kept meticulous records because they were going to exterminate an entire race, and they were so proud of the work that they did, so they maintained meticulous records. So our Rebbitzin has a PhD in political science and statistics. She surveyed 3,000 teenagers and confirmed the importance of Holocaust education. She confirmed statistically that Holocaust education significantly reduced harboring anti-Semitic thoughts, and that the students would even come to the aid of others who were being persecuted for being Jewish. We formed the Never Again Committee at our temple and are providing Holocaust books to the Rockville Center school system. We met with 15 school administrators. We all told about our backgrounds and our story. The principal of the middle school looked at me and said, "We are both here today because of your father. Your father liberated my great-grandmother from Theresienstadt." Being here this evening with our family is indeed a miracle. A month ago, we witnessed a miracle. My mom opened the ark at her great-grandson's bar mitzvah. She sat with him for 2 hours. He had a school project. He was given the choice of reading a Holocaust book, watching a Holocaust movie, or sitting with a survivor. He chose to sit with his great-grandmother. I told him, "Ari, you should record this." He says, "No, I'll remember." 2 hours later, he said, "Pop, you know what? You were right, I should have recorded it." He wrote a report for his class and presented it, and they unanimously voted that he needs to make a movie. My mom looked at me and said, "You know, when I was in Auschwitz, I never dreamt that someday I could sit with my great-grandson and tell my story." You can see the photos on the table, the family, the history, my dad in his uniform, in his tank, on his tank crew. Many of those were lost. And I am standing here today, and almost everyone here except for my mother is here today because of the miracles that God granted to her. So thanks, Mom, and thank you. As many as they have. Yes. Sure.
I would say that I'm officially beginning tonight. I'm going to tell a fundraiser. We're going to get a tank in every Jewish home. Clearly, that is the solution. I want to say thank you so much.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate the story.
Thank you.